Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Ohio Valley Real Estate Report. My name is Johnny Kazemka, broadcasting live from our St. Clairsville, Ohio office studio. And with me today, Scott Connors.
How's it going, Johnny?
Not too bad, not too bad. So today, Scott, you brought up a couple different interesting tidbits and facts about real estate pricing. And what do we got today?
So, you and I are both math nerds.
You more than me, but I like to think I can compete.
You're definitely a math nerd. Don't sell yourself short. A couple things popped up in my brain to talk about today. I want to talk about pricing is kind of the main topic. We get pushback. I've gotten pushback my entire career about, why are these homes so overpriced? The prices are just out of control around here, right?
Sure.
And I thought we'd start by, we've been getting the question over and over again about interest rates.
Yeah, undoubtedly.
Yeah,
the single biggest topic of 2023.
It has been. And the question we always get is, how's that affected you guys? And the answer is?
Not as much as you would think.
If at all. It's still a very strong seller's market. We were digging through some numbers earlier. In the Wheeling market, there is, actually across the Ohio Valley, about 2.5 months worth of inventory, meaning that if nothing new got listed, we'd be out of listings in about 2.5 months.
Correct.
And historically, that's very low.
It's almost half is what it should be.
Correct. And so that means that we are still very much in a seller's market. We've not seen prices decline. We've not seen inventory go up. All these classic signs of a market slowing down, we've not seen at all.
And it's one of the perks of living in the Ohio Valley. We talked about this on a different podcast, is large scale. There's two different sets of economics, macro level, micro level, right? When you look at things at a macro level and you say, okay, we can speculate on what any given market's going to do, the Ohio Valley might be the most micro of microeconomic levels you could possibly imagine, because all these large-scale impacts, you hear the things of the gloom and doom and possible recession and real estate market crash and all these things, which may actually happen in larger markets. Our market doesn't go through the same experiences as large-scale markets.
It sure doesn't.
So when people are tuning into CNN or Fox News or whatever and seeing these things and they're echoing everything that they hear, it's not reality for where we live.
It sure isn't, and the numbers bear that out. Just looking at some quick figures, not going to do a lot of math on the air here because that's pretty boring.
Sure.
But in October, which is the most recent month we have stats for, number of properties listed down almost 5%. New pendings up 40% in October over September. So that's pretty strong. One thing I found was very interesting is the average list to sale price. And this leads right into our pricing conversation. So that's the percentage of what is something selling for versus what it was listed at.
Sure.
And that number right now is 96%.
And we talked about this on a different podcast as far as, different timing of the year. But what a strong stat that would be to support, what we're talking about as far as housing values and what things, if you're expecting the market to crash, where would you suggest that? What would you point to suggest?
Well, there isn't anything.
Correct.
And when I've heard this forever, every single client I've ever had who says, I'm going to wait for the market to come back down before I buy, has ended up spending more than they needed to had they not waited.
Sure.
So another one of my fun stats, because we talk to buyers all the time right now who are saying, hey, interest rates are high. I'm going to wait for them to come down. I'm not doing anything. That's a risky play, isn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's plausible to speculate on any market: stocks, houses, shoes, cars. I mean, I've actually been putting my own car purchase off for a while, waiting for the car market. But
be
again,
careful with that.
Well, precisely. I'm not going to sit there indefinitely waiting for something to happen, because what people forget about is you're competing with buyers. That real estate is a basic human need. It rivals food and water. It truly does.
It really is. When you need to move, you need to move.
You have to. So if you're waiting for something to come down because you're trying to be a more of an advantageous buyer, good luck when you're competing with someone who has to buy, who has to sell because of those complications. That it's going to be a competitive market all the time. It doesn't, just because the interest rates go down, it may be a more opportunistic market. But if you wait 5 years and then prices keep going up, what do you think you've gained by, you got a lower interest rate. You also bought it for a higher price.
Of course. And the problem is, how long might you have to wait for that rate to come down? One of my favorite stats I saw recently was in 1972, interest rates were a little over 7%. And if you were a buyer in 1972 and you said, boy, these rates are up, because they were, that was high.
Sure.
And you said, I'm going to wait for them to come back down before I buy again. You would have had to wait 21 years. 1993 is the next time rates drop below 7.3%. And so, without question, that would be a bad play. You would have lost a fortune had you not bought. The people, our parents, our grandparents who bought homes in the 60s and 70s and sat on them, they made a fortune on them.
Sure.
And people who sat out the market got left out of the market.
Well, what does 21 years worth of growth look like just to inherit a lower interest rate?
Well, it's huge.
So yeah, well, great, you got it at 5%, but I would rather buy a house at 1970 at 7% than 1990 at 5%.
Of course,
just
without question. And unfortunately, what happened was, if you bought a house, you could have bought a house in 1972 at 7%. If you waited until 1990, you might have paid 10% because they still hadn't come back down far enough.
Correct. Yeah, it's all about what they call, well, even now we have to go through it on the closing disclosures, but they call it TIP, total interest paid. And what always confuses me is about the level of people that forget about refinancing. I understand you want to get the lowest interest rate. We do too. There's other things we can do as far as buying interest rate points, and we can talk about that, and nuance around it if you will. But refinancing, if you buying today and refinancing later, is almost the equivalent of waiting until the interest rates drop and then buying then.
Except you've missed out on all the gains you got in the meantime.
Correct. Precisely. And so if you're paying rent right now and you're watching that, paying rent is just paying a mortgage at 100% interest. Who cares what today's interest rate is on an actual mortgage? If you are paying rent, you're paying 100% interest.
That's exactly right. And so we look at the numbers on the market, and the market's strong. It's still a seller's market. There's absolutely no indication it's going to go down. So we can expect, given recent history, given more distant history, prices will continue to go up. There's no indication that interest rates are coming down anytime soon. I also don't know that they're going to spike up to the 14, 15% we saw in the late 70s. Well, some people saw. We didn't see that. But
Sure. Yeah, man.
and so, again, all that points to this being the right time to buy. So we talk about that market and pricing pressure, which is really where I want to go with this. Hear the comments from our clients. We see the comments on social media about, why are these homes so overpriced? Why these sellers are crazy asking these numbers. I'd never pay that for that house, right? And one of my questions I always ask my clients, I'll ask you, we'll do a little role. Who sets the pricing on the real estate market?
Well, who sets the pricing, or I guess it's two types of answers.
Yeah, who determines what the pricing is going to be?
The seller, I would say, sets the pricing, but the buyer is the one that ultimately determines everything.
Exactly. We typically hear the seller get blamed for high prices, or we hear the realtors get blamed for high prices, which simply isn't true. But the truth is, the people driving the market, driving the pricing increases, are the other buyers.
Well, correct. And I've always said this before. If I actually had any significant means of influencing value, and we do have a subtle way of doing it with our advertisement, the more reach we get, the broader the audience, typically the more demand is created. More demand equals more price. But if I had such influence to be so persuasive with my advertising, or anything that I could possibly do to influence price, I would buy the houses as they sit today, immediately just use my persuasive power to influence that price to my advantage. And I would never even work with clients.
Of course.
Buy here, sell there, and just rinse and repeat. It's just not even reasonable to think that that's an actual expectation.
It is. I agree with you. And so we see all the time in multiple offer situations, which, by the way, I just had one of those this last weekend. So again, in this high interest rate, supposedly slowing market, we're still seeing multiple offers. As recently as, I think it was May of this year, that average list to sale price was over 100%, meaning that on average, the average home that was listed in our market sold for more than the asking price.
Yeah.
So that tells you that asking prices are not out of line. They're just not. And when you've got a client who is making an offer on something, they tend to get upset with, again, either us or the sellers for being greedy or trying to manipulate the market. But the truth is, you don't have that market go up unless there's someone else willing to pay more than you are.
Yeah, the market's made up by two factors, and anybody tells you anything different, they're selling you something. It's made up what a buyer gives, a seller accepts.
Right, and a seller typically is going to get as much as they can. They're going to accept the highest offer they think they can reasonably get.
Yeah, and I guess it even depends. Someone who comes to the table with a home sale contingent offer, someone who comes to the table with a big bag of money, two completely different means of being able to influence the seller's ultimate decision.
Sure.
Right? Because you're making one out of convenience or one out of, even inconvenience. You can argue back and forth. So we're talking about things, we're talking about pricing. I had mentioned earlier, talking about value and what the difference is between the two. And someone who, obviously we want to get you, if we're representing you as a buyer, we want to get you the house at the best price, the best value, best, everything that you would want to see as a buyer. But we don't have that type of power. And as a buyer, you have to be able to compete with it. I look at it as there's a tough man trophy or my shorts from back in 2012, right? I have to be able to compete with the person in the ring with me.
That's right? Exactly right.
Or I'm going to get my head knocked off. So it's one of those things where, like, as a buyer now, you can either, say, man, these are too high, or this is unfair, or this is that. Like, you can blame all you want. The reality is there's 10 other people across the ring from you that have already been through the ringer, and they're coming out swinging next time.
That's right. And so if you miss out on that house that you offered on and you think it's overpriced, but there were 2 or 3 other people willing to pay more than you were, it's not the seller's fault. Again, a seller, it's kind of an assumption in our business that the seller is going to get as much as they can. It's basic economics.
Sure.
And so we operate under that assumption. And typically, if a buyer loses out on a house, it's not because prices are inflated. It's not because we're jacking up or sellers are being greedy. It's because someone else was willing to pay more than you were. And in almost every case, that other person is going to get that house.
Yeah, specifically. And it's just, again, it's one of those things that you have to do equal to or better than your competition. And competition is what is driving price, not the seller's greed, not our advertising, not anything that has, again, blaming is just one way of, by the time you're done blaming and you understand what we're talking about, you would have missed out on 5 different opportunities. Like I said, it's okay it's perfectly acceptable to speculate on a market, but it's not acceptable to sit there and to, if you miss the opportunities that exist today, because even now it's an advantageous time to buy. It might not be as advantageous as it was maybe during the lowest interest rates.
Sure.
But there's still advantages to buying today.
So it's an interesting approach or interesting thought process, and maybe this is how we wrap up today. Think about what we've been through, say, in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years. Maybe go back to 2016, okay? We've had economic uncertainty. I think uncertainty has been the key word, right? With some political craziness that goes on, and elections that get contested, and controversial political leaders. A lot of uncertainty out there. We survived the largest global pandemic that we ever thought we'd see, when really a lot of the economy crashed around us. Housing market didn't.
Well, not
at
here.
all.
Yeah,
definitely not here. So through COVID, prices went up. Through economic or political uncertainty, prices went up. Through now a war in the Middle East, another war in the Middle East, prices have gone up. With interest rates going up, prices have gone up. So I'm not one to speculate on the future in any way. I don't know what's going to happen in the next 6 months. I know that I've been in this almost 15 years, and at any point in my career, if you look 6 months ahead, the market went up. And so maybe this is the time it goes down, but I don't know that I'd be willing to roll the dice as a buyer and try to wait it out and maybe be priced out of the market completely 6 months or a year from now if things continue on the undeniable trend that they've been on for the last several years.
Well, and even if you speculate correctly, and even if they go down, what do you think they're going to go down to? Because it matters.
Right.
If it's going to go down by half, then it's well worth the wait.
Sure.
Do you really think the housing market in the Ohio Valley is going to crash by half because of the interest rates?
Sure.
What are you going to point to and say, okay, this is going to be and what defines a crash? Is it a 5% reduction? 10%? You tell me, because to be honest, a 10% reduction is big, but not if the next 10, 20 years comes with a 20% increase of overall. It's still a net positive.
So think of it this way. I would say 10% drop. 10% would be a huge change, right? So that means that $200,000 home is now worth $180,000. Okay, sure. You save yourself $20,000. That's a great deal. In my 15 years, we've never seen a 10% drop.
Never.
We've never seen a 5% drop year over year. And so if you're going to sit out and speculate that maybe interest rates are going to come down, maybe prices are going to come down, given all the historical data that says they won't, chances are you're going to lose.
Yeah, and again, it just ties back into the reasoning why, because I think people focus on that negative, the side of things. Like, this is why I'm not buying, because interest rates are so high, so everybody's not buying because I'm just like everybody. The reality is there isn't. People that need to buy, again, they're going to. And we talked about pricing and value, and I said before this, value is something that's different than pricing, at least in my opinion. And you have 2 different types of value: intrinsic and extrinsic. Intrinsic is easy enough. It's what something's made out of. This coffee mug made out of ceramic, right? But if I were to tell you, or anybody watching, that Michael Jordan drank this every day during his tenure at North Carolina, this coffee mug is now priceless to the right collector. You see what I'm saying? It's the people that are buying out of demand, out of pure necessity. The intrinsic value of owning a home, upsizing because they're relocating here, because they're taking a new job, they have to buy.
Life happens. What are the 4 Ds we talk about? Diapers?
Death, divorce, diapers, and the 3 Ds.
I thought there was a 4th.
But absolutely, and it's one of those things where the intrinsic value to that particular buyer it doesn't matter what the geopolitical climate looks like. It doesn't
They need
matter
to
what
buy.
the interest rates. They're going to buy.
Yeah,
Right?
and so far, we sat here before we went on the air and looked at about 3 years worth of data, and every single metric we see has gone up consistently over the last 3 years, and that's in the face of all the things I rattled off that have shaken our economy and shaken our political system and shaken our faith in everything, but the housing market keeps going up, and so maybe something's going to happen in the next 6 months to bring it back down. But if I'm a buyer out there right now, I'm not taking that chance. I'm going to get in now because chances are it's only going to continue to go up from here.
Sure. Yeah,
So,
without question.
there you
Well,
have it.
anything more you want to add before we sign off here?
I think that was a lot of numbers and a lot of data to throw out there in a short little podcast.
Yeah, well, we'll expand upon it in the next one. But anyways, thanks for the like and share, guys. And thank you for